This video will cover the buyer setup of a Lead Prosper Ping Post campaign. To start, you'll need your buyer's API specs. Here, we have some example Lead Prosper Ping Post specs. You'll see the field name, the type and format, whether or not it's required on the ping and the post, and the description as well. The ping will only send out partial and case-specific information about the lead, such as zip code or city, and will never contain the lead's personal information. Once the buyer has accepted the ping, they will be sent the post containing the full lead information. The description gives us the information that must be sent for these fields. For static values such as LP campaign ID, LP supplier ID, and LP key, the description will contain values that must be hard-coded into the payload. The description for dynamic fields such as first name and city will use payload fields to extract the information from the lead and insert it into the payload. Keep in mind that your fields do not need to match exactly, as they can be field mapped. If we click over to the payload builder, we see here that incident date from our buyer's API specs is mapped to accident date and currently represented is mapped to have attorney in the campaign setup. You'll begin your buyer setup by copying and pasting the ping URL from your API specs and selecting the correct request method and payload type. If you go to the ping section on your API specs, you'll see that the method for the HTTP request is post, along with the URL, the header type, and an example of the payload. It says here that the payload can be sent as either a form or JSON. It's important to note that if you change the payload type from JSON to form or vice versa once you've made changes in the payload builder, the payload will revert back to its default and you will lose any progress. So keep in mind that you should set the payload type before making any changes to the payload. The payload will contain the fields that are laid out in the buyer's API specs. Those in bold are the fields that are required. The first three static fields laid out in the API specs, LP campaign ID, LP supplier ID, and LP key, are unique to every Lead Prosper campaign and need to be hard-coded into every payload. You can copy and paste these from the API specs into your payload builder. Since these are Lead Prosper API specs, be sure to add the field LP Action Test so that when you test your buyer, the Lead Prosper system knows that this is a test lead. You will remove this later after receiving a successful test response and before taking the campaign live. You'll then map the rest of your fields from the API specs to the payload. For example, the city field will map to the city payload. Pay attention to which fields are required in the ping, as you only want to send partial lead information here. Once again, your campaign fields do not need to match the buyer's fields exactly. The field on the left-hand side of the payload in blue will be sent to the buyer, so make sure that matches the API specs. However, the green campaign field on the right just needs to make sense to you. Next is headers. Per our API specs, content type is the only header. This is automatically filled out here based on the payload type selected above. Finally, for the ping setup, we have our response mapping. In Lead Prosper, the response type will always be in JSON format. The specs dictate that we are looking for status and accepted as the key and value for a successful ping. Since this is a ping, toggle real-time price on. This will extract the bid price from the buyer's response. Here you enter /bid/payout, which instructs the LP system to extract the bid from the response. We get this information from our API specs. The send post if section is not necessary and only needs to be used if you want to apply a rule to accepted bids. For example, I can set a rule to only send the post if the bid is greater than or equal to $20, therefore not sending the post to this specific buyer if the bid was less than that amount. If this section is left blank, the post will automatically be sent to any pings that come back as a success. Next is the post setup. Just like the ping setup, you'll copy and paste the URL from the API specs and select the correct request method and payload type. The ping and post URLs are always different, so ensure you are copying and pasting the URL from the post section of your API spec. You'll then complete the post payload with the required fields from your API specs. You'll notice that there is a field named LP ping ID that is required on the post. To get this value, we need to extract it from the ping's response using the LP ping response payload. In the ping section of the API specs under accepted responses, you'll see the key ping ID and its value. Above the payload builder, you'll see the payload LP ping response key. Copy and paste that into the payload builder and replace key with the key from the API specs, which we now know is ping_ID. This will tell the payload to look at the ping response and pull the value to send along with the post. A payload transformer was used here for the phone field. This allows you to change the format of data ingested to match the format required by your buyer. If you'd like to learn more about transformers, click the link above the payload builder here. Just like in the ping setup, the only required header is content type. Once again, this is automatically filled in here once you choose the payload type above. Finally, for the post setup is response mapping. This tells the Lead Prosper system whether the lead was accepted or logged as a duplicate. From the API specs, you can see that the accepted response for the key on the left-hand side is status and the value is accepted. Below that, we see that the key for duplicated responses is status and the value is duplicated. If a lead doesn't come back with an accepted or a duplicated response type, LeadProsper will log that lead as a failed lead. To test your buyer, click Save at the top and then select Test Buyer. Once you get an accepted lead, you can copy all in the top right-hand corner and send the data to your buyer. Once they've confirmed everything looks good, set your buyer to live. Be sure to remove LP Action Test from your payload builder before you go live. If you have any questions, please use the support button or send us an email at support@leadprosper.io.